It always makes me smile because it has that slight tone of the boxing announcer. Do you know what I mean? That's sort of like, just has that. I'm sure this has become, are you sure this isn't a Dutch pulpit? It feels like it's got a Dutch height. Okay, I'm going to do this now because otherwise I get into trouble, but because I put books in the car and Sue tells me I'm really bad at advertising my books because I get up here and I think, oh, it's just minister, and then, so these have been around a while, and then there's some newer ones out there. Kisses from a Good God is my journey through cancer, prostate cancer. But it's not just about cancer, it's any kind of journey that you go through in life that's a challenge. And so that's out there. And the reason I ended up bringing books is because Steve and Juliet said the theme was glory. And then they said, oh, you've got a book on glory. It's like, oh yeah, I do. I should try selling it, probably. And that's What on Earth is Glory, which is the first book I wrote. And I seem to be writing at the moment, which is, I don't think I ever thought that there would come a point in my life where I had about 6 or 8 books that I'd written, but there we go. And definitely my English teachers at school never thought I would write 6 or 8 books. 6 or 8 lines would have been a good day. But What on Earth is Glory is my, it really was that Destiny didn't like having a book with a question, but to me, the title had to be a question because what on earth is glory? I couldn't really fully answer it. I still think it's a really good book, actually, and I unpack it a little bit, and some of what Juliet was sharing are some of my favorite verses, that you are our letter, written not on tablets of stone, but written on our hearts. So those are both out there. Out there also is Things Fathers Do, which is, that book was written on a plane, basically, on the way back from the 2014 World Cup in Brazil, because I was preaching the next morning and realized I didn't have a preach, and I thought, well, what can I do? And I'd just been on a trip with my youngest son, and so I wrote a book called Things Fathers Do, because that's what fathers do, isn't it? Jump on planes and go to soccer World Cups if they get the chance. And so that's out there. Those two and that are all just straight price of 10, I think. And then there's also out there, and we are heading in that Christmas direction, but there's a children's book out there, which is called Things My Daddy Does. And it's a kid's book. It's a beautiful illustration. An artist that we know illustrated it for us. And it's really just a book to read to 5 to 8-year-old kids, maybe 4 to 8-year-old kids. And just talking through, these things my daddy does. He keeps me safe. He teaches me emotions. He teaches me thankfulness. He teaches me about mystery and wonder. So that's out there as well. So, yeah. Was that okay? I managed to remember to try and sell some books. So there we go. I don't think, I'm really good. If Tim said, can you sell my book? I'd stand up here and tell you for 10 minutes. But my book, that's a different thing completely. But, and actually, as a new book will probably be out, I'm just finalizing some of the design stuff, which is, it's a book called Your Divine Purpose. It was going to be called Sent, until I sat in Chris Valentin's office and he said, that's a really bad title for a book. And I said, oh, thank you. Actually, he didn't say that. He said, I hate the title of your book and your school. And I said, oh, thanks, Chris. I was looking forward to this meeting with you too. And then he said, it needs to be something more direct. So it's called Your Divine Purpose. And I've subtitled it An Apostolic Field Guide for Every Believer. And it's about 42 chapters, very short, simple chapters, unpacking what the apostolic looks like in relationship to worship, to marketplace, etc., etc. Because some people who know me better know that I have a passion that every believer is apostolic and that we are the sent ones, and that the job description of an apostle is to equip the saints to be apostolic, the same as the pastor's job description is to equip the saints to be pastoral. But somehow, when people say the word apostolic, they think they must be talking about being an apostle. And so that'll be out anytime soon. And I'm actually towards the tail end of probably the most enjoyable thing I've ever written, which is a book called Encounter Christianity, which is it's basically my belief that the Apostle Paul on the Damascus Road he did have an encounter. It wasn't just a conversion, but that encounter equipped him. And I've been learning to read the Bible, particularly Paul, through the lens of the Damascus Road. And it's my belief that the encounter didn't just equip him, personally, but it actually equipped him to write specifically the letter to the Corinthians, which addresses the issues of our day. And that, so in our encounters, in other words, in your encounters, the Lord is giving you keys for how to live in the age and in the world in which we live. So, but that'll probably be this time next year's conference. It will be heading for being out. So anyway, that's what I've been doing. In case anyone's worried that I'm not, keeping my brain active or something like that, I've been writing. So. A little while ago, in fact, I bought Jesus Revolution because I have a US iTunes account, so I can sneak and get American films out a bit earlier than you get them here. And so I bought Jesus Revolution, which is it's the movie about the Jesus People Revolution, which began in the 60s. And I bought it, and then when it came out, I was on a plane and on my own, and I watched it on the plane, and I genuinely cried watching this movie about the Jesus People Revolution. I sat on a plane, I was just sitting there crying, and then a little while later, Sue watched it with me, and I think I've now watched it 4 times. And I think it is going to be available in some form or another here. I think it's on Netflix now in America. I don't know whether it's on Netflix here. My wife, being typically who she is, she watched it with me, and she starts looking up names of people, and she particularly looked up Greg Laurie. And I'm like, gosh, why did we never know who this guy Greg Laurie was? We lived in California for 15 years, and he's just kind of down the road. Why did we never know this, man that came to Christ in the Jesus Revolution and has, planted churches and a couple of months ago, he baptized 4,000 people, was it, on one weekend? Sorry? 3,400 people he baptized in Pirates Cove in California. And this is all somehow linked to the movie. And so what happened was that there were a couple of things, to be honest, going on in my life. I had this kind of crazy lie that I was living, that was that if I'm writing, I can't read. And there's some truth in it. Like you don't kind of want to read something specifically about the subject that you're writing about necessarily, unless it's kind of research oriented. So I had this kind of lie going on, but I was also, to be honest, in a fairly difficult situation and quite drained with a couple of things that were going on. And I just knew that I had to pick up books and read and throw myself back into reading. And the first thing I did was that I read the 3 Lonnie Frisbee books that are connected to the Jesus Revolution. And then after that, I read John Wimber by Connie Dawson. And those 4 books started just getting me thinking about what I'm going to call revival in our lifetime. Do it again. And I'm going to use a book of the Bible, so that'll encourage you. But I just was reading these. I know that I had those little seeds dropped in me about how Lonnie Frisbee ended badly, or so the story and the rumor went, that I'd taken not a very active offense, but a degree of an offense, a kind of a defensive offense, if you can have such a thing, that was, I'm not going to read that. And so I find myself reading these 3 books on the life of Lonnie Frisbee. And, he was very much one of the absolute key players. And I really can't encourage enough to watch Jesus Revolution. If you want to get stirred up, it will stir you up as a movie. And it's not, a perfect portrayal of it. And it's obviously dramatized, but it will stir you up. And so I'm reading these incredible books on this man, Lonnie Frisbee. And yes, sure, he was messed up. Sure, he was bruised fruit. Sure, he was a damaged tree. Yes, he was. But there were things that he did that as I watched the movie and read about him, it's like, I want that. I want to be around that. And then I read John Wimber by Connie Dawson, which is just a brilliant book. Now, there are some other books about John Wimber, and I haven't read them. But this book is just so beautiful. And I just started looking and thinking, I want to be around that. But then I started thinking, no, it's more than that. We mustn't waste the revivals of our lifetime. We mustn't. And so I'm just going to share some things. How tidily this comes out, who knows? But I'm not sure I got too worried about tidy preaching really anymore. I just want to make sure I say something. I was drawn to a verse, and I'm going to run through this book in the Bible, which then very conveniently happens to contain a verse on glory. So it feels as though that I'm actually serving the theme of the weekend as well, which is, just me being slightly amusing. But Habakkuk, as Bill Johnson likes to call it. But then he likes to call Malachi Malachi the Italian prophet too. So, and I just like the way he messes around with people's names. But Habakkuk 3:2, Lord, I have heard the report about thee, and I fear. O Lord, revive thy work in the midst of the years. In the midst of the years, make it known. In wrath, remember mercy. And I read it, and now whether this is the correct interpretation, I don't know. But what I read was, why do we have to wait until everything has died down to believe that he would revive it? Why can't he revive his work in the midst of the years? In the midst of the years, make it known. And so that caused me just to run back through Habakkuk, and I'm going to run through that. And then I'm just going to run through a little bit of history that sort of overlaps Steve Juliet, Sue Paul, and weaves into the history of this land. And if I had any doubt about what I should share, I was on the senior leader team Zoom on Tuesday evening, and I didn't know what the theme of it was, Bethel senior team, which I'm honored to still be a part of. And so I jump on a Zoom once a month, a half-day meeting. And Chris Valentin had written on a board his timeline of when Bethel first started going to different places, Portland and Anaheim and Morning Star, and connecting to different people. I'm like, okay, I'm onto something. So I sent them our list. So Steve and Juliet, Bill and Chris know when you were married, when you went to Bethel, when you went to Avivamento, when you got baptized and all of that stuff, because it was on the timeline. And I knew you wouldn't mind. So I knew this is a legitimate thing to run through. But let me just run through Habakkuk with you for a minute, and I'm not going to read all of it. It is, though, an absolute stunning chapter. And I have scribbled down, interestingly, alongside some of the scriptures that Juliet was using this morning, that God's creativity is, how do I write it? Chaos is where God is at his most creative. In the beginning, it was chaos. And he said, let there be light. Let there be light is the greatest statement of creativity ever. You don't sound like you believe me. Like you think the painting you painted and put on the fridge last week is more creative. No, when he said, let there be light, everything kicked in. And so I think sometimes what we have a tendency to do is to look at the world and look at the chaos, and we drop our heads instead of realizing that in the chaos is an invitation for God's greatest creativity. So let me run through just a few verses. Habakkuk 1:5, which is really why I'm going to go through a list. Look among the nations, observe, be astonished, wonder, because I am doing something in your days you would not believe if you were told. That's not bad, is it? You must have had a good lunch. You lot are quite quiet after lunch. Habakkuk 2:2, then the Lord answered me and said, record the vision and inscribe it on tablets, that the one who reads it may run. I've always thought the significance of that is this. The one who reads it is also the one who writes it. When you write something, you're the first person to read it. It's logical, I think. And we write the vision that he who reads it may run. There is an invitation for us to run. Then let's look at a few other scriptures in here. I'm pulling pieces out, but Habakkuk 2:4. Behold, as for the proud one, his soul is not right within him, but the righteous will live by his faith. Habakkuk contains keys of who you are. You are the righteous ones. You're the righteous ones. There are a number of themes in the book. There's greed and drunkenness. There's debts, verse 6. There's looting, verse 8. There's bloodshed, verse 8. There's evil gain, verse 9. There's building on violence, verse 12. But then there's the great verse 14, Habakkuk 2:14. For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of God as the waters cover the sea. And just in case you didn't know, because you haven't read my book, there's another verse that says the whole earth is filled with the glory. I used to sit next to somebody in Bethel, and whenever anyone missed out knowledge, they'd nudge me and say they missed out knowledge. And when I studied it, I started nudging them back and saying, no, there's one verse that says the earth is full of the glory, which is Isaiah 6. The earth is full of the glory, but Habakkuk 2:14 says the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory. Which means that we have an assignment, because knowledge is ours. To fill the earth with the knowledge, the awareness is what Juliet was preaching. Which is why you need to know what glory is. Because if you don't know what glory is, how can you fill the earth with the knowledge of glory? Because the earth is full of glory. We have immorality, verse 15. We have the great statement though. In 2:20, but the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth be silent before him. And then we have what I've already read. O Lord, revive thy work in the midst of the years. And then the book ends with where we're heading. You see, it has our identity. We're the righteous ones. It has the earth will be filled, our purpose. And it has our direction. He makes me walk on the high places. Habakkuk is a book that describes great chaos, but it also describes the absolute opposites of that chaos. And I believe it is an invitation for us to walk as the righteous ones, filling the earth with the knowledge of the glory of God and walking on the high places in the midst of chaos. Revive thy work, O God. If I have one goal this afternoon, I just want to make me hungry and hopefully you hungry to see it again, do it again. And as I just begin to think through and review my lifetime, our lifetime, I just want to share with you a list now. You're going to add your own to this. You'll add your dates to this. I just wrote to Steve and Julia and said, give me a few of the key dates, because these two walked with Vineyard and we have walked with Bethel, and somehow we met. We have seen so much in the last 60 or 70 years. We now have stadiums at times that are full for Christian events that hold the same number of people who got saved in the Welsh revival, 100,000. In a stadium. These are the days in which we live, and I just want to make sure that we don't take for granted what we have been privileged to be a part of. And let's release a cry, revive thy work in the midst of the years. I do not want to be somebody who looks back and says, we missed it. We missed it. And I'll throw out a few lessons as we go through. 1966, significant year for us English. the last time we had glory in our hands in the name of football, let's put it that way. But it was the beginning of the Jesus People movement with Lonnie Frisbee. And when you watch it, there are some incredible scenes. But you know, this man, Lonnie, God had so got hold of him. He was walking in signs, wonders, and miracles. And it's quite extraordinary to watch and to read about him. And you know, he was part of the Jesus People movement, having been a hippie in San Francisco, in Haight-Ashbury, and had tried all the stuff, as it were, that the world had to offer. And he finds Jesus. And he finds himself in Chuck Smith's church. The most extraordinary story, and my favorite scene, which I think is a picture for us, but my favorite scene in the movie is when Chuck's washing the feet of people coming into the meeting, because there was this worry about the hippies with no shoes on their feet messing up the carpet. Really? That's what they're worried about. They got a dead church, and they got people coming in who are saved, and the elders and the deacons are worried that the carpet will get dirty. I'll never forget. I preached, I won't name, the church Sue and I grew up in, she was there before me. They let me preach about once a year. And just about, I think that's what I was allowed, once a year, that was enough. I remember going there one Sunday night, and they put a new carpet down on the sort of the higher up stage area. You know, there was a new carpet laid, and there was a sign on the door, and it said, "Don't walk on the carpet." I remember, even in those days, I could get a prophetic word somehow out of "don't walk on the carpet." And in my preach, it said, that's the problem with some of us Christians. We don't allow God to use us for what we were made to be used for. I think I might have got into minor trouble. But anyway, this scene, he's washing their feet as they come into church. And then there's this scene, and some of the elders, they stand up to walk out because they've had enough. And a couple of them have walked out. And then there's this one I'm careful about saying very elderly man, but I'm pretty sure he was a good 20 years older than me. But he stood up, and at first you think, oh, is he going as well? And he doesn't. He stands up and he walks across the aisle, and he sits amongst the hippies, and he puts his arm around them. And it's this picture. We've got to make sure that we don't reject the next move of God. We have to make sure that we do not do that. It might look different. It might look like a bunch of hippies, but I tell you this, I would love to be in a church that gets filled up with a bunch of messed up hippies, quite frankly. So there's that in 1966, extraordinary, that went around the world, that was on the front cover of Time magazine, that was in all the major newspapers of its day. In our lifetime, or certainly mine, I know some of you are younger, but 66, yeah? Do it again, God. Would you do it again? Where are today's hippies? What do they look like? I got saved in 73, just to put that in there, because I put some of our personal dates, but I got saved February 28th, 1973, 3:30 in the afternoon. And so began my journey. As I look at this, I remember saying to Sue, and I just watched Jesus Revolution, read some of the books, I said, why did nobody tell us in our church what was happening in the world? Well, because they didn't want to know that stuff, because I was in, a stuffy church to some extent. It was good, gave me a great foundation. 1976, as I look at history, there's something inside of me that actually hurts. Because 1976, in my lifetime, Catherine Kuhlman died. I didn't even know she existed. And something about that breaks my heart. Lonnie Frisbee and Catherine Kuhlman were friends. They were on a couple of TV programs together. In our lifetime, somebody like Catherine Kuhlman walked in such signs, wonders, and miracles. And we never knew. 1977, John Wimber began preaching on healing. Why do I put that in that way? Because one of the things that I think we need to realize is that the things we walk in today for nothing, somebody paid a price for in our lifetime. And you read, I can't recommend it enough, Connie Dawson on John Wimber's life. Because we can easily think, oh, we've always been doing this. No, we haven't. We haven't always believed that he heals. We haven't always had people come to the front to get healed. We haven't even had, for much more than 100 years, altar calls inviting people to get saved, really. In 1978, Steve was saved. 1979, we got married. The only reason I'm saying this, I want to encourage you. Where's your timeline? Where are you in this timeline? This is our lifetime, and revival has happened around us in our lifetime. And some of the most dramatic changes in the way that we minister as Christians have happened in our lifetime. And I'll give you a list of those at the end. 1980, I never knew that 1980 Mother's Day, Lonnie Frisbee preached in Vineyard Church and basically birthed the Vineyard. This hippie, this messed up hippie, gets saved in the Jesus People movement, who had various things happen to him, fallouts with Chuck Smith, ends up going over to Florida to be with the heavy shepherding crowd that were over there. And that didn't work out for him. Goes back over to the west coast of America, finds himself connected to John Wimber, and basically births the Vineyard on Mother's Day with a phenomenal outpouring of the Holy Spirit. 1981, John Wimber visited David Watson and David Pitches in this country. Some of you will know that story. And it's really the birth of new wine in this country. I've had the privilege of preaching out of the pulpit that David Watson preached out of, up there in York. This is our history in our lifetime. It's happened. This is not something we read in books and we can't relate to it. We can't connect to it. It's in our lifetime. 1982, John Wimber visits Sandy Miller at HTB. At which point incredible things are going on, and in many respects you can trace Alpha back to that visit. And the increase of Alpha, the most incredible ministry that has swept around the world, leading people to Jesus in our lifetime. You know, the prison service, where I was a prison governor, at one stage there was an Alpha course in every prison in our country. Every prison in our country, in our lifetime. And it's fair to say, I put a paragraph in, it's fair to say that John Wimber had a massive effect on the prophetic, worship, inner healing, and church growth. And few would argue that anyone had a greater impact than that. And he also, of course, had an incredible impact in the area of worship and intimacy in worship. Now, even if you just stop and think through worship in our lifetime, from the days of Lonnie Frisbee and the Jesus People Revolution, when you watch the movie, you watch it and think, gosh, those are simple songs. Simple songs. But as I watch it and they're pointing their finger up, I have a flashback to the congregational church that I was in, where for the first time there's young people who are holding up and going, one way, Jesus Christ. That was radical. In our lifetime, we've gone from hymns in a hymn book to songs that were sung in the hippie Jesus People movement, to overhead projectors, to worship, to psalm in song, to scripture in song, to praise and worship, to the presence. In our lifetime, it hasn't always been like this. We are privileged to walk in it. And that which we walk in, men and women who went before us fought for it and paid a price for it. And especially one of those would be John Wimber. 1985, John Wimber wrote Power Evangelism. Radical. This is a radical book. John Wimber, it's also true to say, I think had a massive influence on inner healing. And whilst other people's names will be in the list, of introducing inner healing quite rightly, there was something that he brought with the marriage of healing his own. He was trained as a family therapist when work wasn't going well for him. He had a massive influence there, and so do many others. Steve attended Acts 86 with John Wimber at Birmingham NEC. In 1987, Bill Johnson took his elders to John Wimber in Anaheim and never got prayed for by John Wimber. When Bill came back, healings broke out. Bill will say, we went and heard John Wimber for the first time and realized we were doing exactly the same thing as John Wimber, but we didn't have any fruit. It's pretty much how he describes it. Now, I know a lot of this is, I'm focusing around John Wimber for the minute, but I just painting a picture because this is in our lifetime. The first March for Jesus, 1987 in London, in our lifetime. Those are some golden years around then. I could have added a number of other things happened in this country. Lists of events in the Albert Hall that happened. And the birth of movements like Pioneer and New Frontiers and, therefore Terry Virgo, significantly there, and Gerald Coates. In our lifetime. It's so rich, there's so much that has happened. Bethel got introduced in about 1988 to Morning Star and was introduced to the prophets. Lots of overlap there around the prophets. What struck me when I read all these books was I'm privileged to know most of them. I mean, it was just kind of crazy when I started thinking Bob Jones, Bobby Connor, Larry Randolph, and people like, it's like, gosh, I found myself in that world. I mean, I'm the least qualified man in my mind to have been in that world. The most surprised man I know that I would get to be amongst those people. But in our lifetime, some of the prophetic words are related to Paul Cain and Bob Jones, connected to John Wimber and Mike Bickle and the Kansas City Prophets. These were breakthrough moments where what we walk in today was paid for at a great price. This is the revival of our lifetime. And I just want us to get hungry to believe he will do it again. Steve joined Vineyard London about 1988. Wimber met Paul Cain in 1988 as well. Now again, this is a lesson I think we have to learn. And that lesson is we need to make sure that we don't reject things because we heard something about a person. There were controversies about Paul Cain, controversies about Bob Jones. Yes, there were, and there were very real ones. But these men put seeds in the ground that we get to walk in, and particularly in these cases, in the area of the prophetic. And this is in our lifetime. And obviously, if I decide to do a PhD on this would take a week to go through a timeline. I'm just giving you some headlines. One of the most beautiful things for me is, and it's just one of those funny thoughts that I have, is that Steve and I were in the same meeting in 1990. We just didn't know each other. We were in Docklands Arena for the Holiness Conference. Anyone else there? 2 of you. Most extraordinary event. John Wimber, Mike Bickle, Paul Cain, a number of other people. The controversy around that event was that there was a word that we were going to see revival in London. And there was a lot of controversy around it because it didn't seem to happen when everyone thought it would happen, like next week. Many believe that it did happen, and it happened when Toronto happened, and Toronto came and visited HTB. But we're always looking for measurables, aren't we, as Christians? What I know is this, that I sat in that Docklands Arena and I heard Paul Cain give a word that I will never forget as long as I live. Because he said God will connect Germany, London, and California. Just before Sue and I left Reading, Bobby Connor gave the same word, God's building a bridge between those 3 places. Now, it may have many applications, but I know for one, it applies to me, and it's been part of my life's journey. I know that it's been a part of so much of Bethel and connecting into here and connecting into Germany. That Awakening Europe, the first Awakening Europe, was in Nuremberg, Germany. So we were at the same event. Steve planted in 1992 Vineyard Southend with Juliet. Oh, not with Juliet, actually. Juliet got saved in that church a year later, which is a kind of fun story. And then there's 1994 on January the 20th, Toronto. And one of the things that for me, and because I didn't know my history, I kind of thought that what happened in Toronto was completely unique. But if you start reading about Mother's Day 1980 in the Vineyard Church with Lonnie Frisbee, or you start looking at what happened in the Jesus Revolution meetings, you'll see that the same manifestations happened and that people were falling, etc., etc. And then it happens on January the 20th under the leadership of Randy Clark, who prior to that had gone to Rodney Howard-Browne. And that John and Carol prior to that, John and Carol Arnott prior to that, had gone to Argentina. And there are these streams and these lines that all flow together. And here's what I know. Every one of you has your line and your stream that flows together. And all I'm trying to say is, this is ours. And this is where we are today. And I just don't want to waste it. Toronto, of course, had its challenges and its critics. There are fascinating criticisms. You know, there was criticism of putting tape down for people to stand on so that they could be caught. And it's like, guys, that was just common sense. And yet it became a reason for division. We have to work out, we have to learn how to maximize the benefits of revival and not trip up over the small stuff. Toronto, in our lifetime, the crazy thing is now I stand in School of Ministry at Bethel and talk, and sometimes I mention Toronto and I realize there's a ton of people who don't have a clue what I'm talking about. Where are we? 1995, Father's Day. What is it about Father's Day? What is it about Mother's Day? Because Father's Day is 1995 Pensacola and that incredible outpouring there. And I was privileged to visit for one night only, so to speak. Incredible what God did there. Incredible worship in our lifetime. Do it again, God. Steve and Juliet were married in 1995, in case you wanted to know. 1996, Bill moved to Bethel from Weaverville. He moved to Bethel when he was interviewed. He only gave them one word. I'm coming to bring revival. And as a result of him coming and praying for the sick, 1,500 people left that church in the first 18 months of him being there, but he never changed the message, never changed the subject. Following year, the School of Ministry at Bethel began. 1997, BSSM began. 1997, Steve and Juliet started planting churches around the UK. 1999, Sue first visited Bethel. In case you don't know our story, she went, I didn't. Women, they seem to get there first very often. It's just a common thing. She came home and knew that it would be the place that we would live. 2001, 4 days after 9/11, we flew out to Bethel on the first plane to fly out of Heathrow Airport. In fact, the first plane, I believe, to fly from Europe actually into America. 2003, Bill published When Heaven Invades Earth. There could be loads of dates I could put in. I'm just putting some that matter to me. 2008, there was Lakeland. Again, another example where we can dismiss it and go, Todd had some problems. Yeah, he did. And so did Lonnie. And so did John Wimber. And so do I. The question is, what are we going to do with what God does? Sue's nodding in agreement that I have problems, I think. Not the same as theirs. She's probably saying, yeah, no. Not quite the same as theirs. 2008, Steve and Juliet planted Leicester. 2015, the first Awakening Europe in Nuremberg, Germany, with our very good friend of all of us, Ben Fitzgerald. and a fulfillment for me of a prophetic word that God would connect California and London and Germany. And that I got to walk that bridge. For me personally, and maybe other people will walk it in different ways. It's in our lifetime. We now live in an age where stadiums are being filled on a regular basis. United meetings in the stadium, Benfica Stadium in Portugal, connected to a Catholic event in our lifetime. The Send events around the world. And I haven't even touched running through that, the great Billy Graham or the great Reinhard Bonnke. In our lifetime, God has raised up men and women and movements in our lifetime. 100,000 people, that was absolutely stunning that was how many were saved in the Welsh revival, can now fit in one stadium for one event in our lifetime. What are we going to do with it? What are you going to do with it? Where do you fit on the timeline? Whatever your ministry is, do you know where your ministry grew out of? Do you know where the authority to walk in the prophetic the way we do today comes from? Do you know that timeline? Do you know the battle that was fought around Mike Bickle and the Kansas City Prophets and the connections to John Wimber and Toronto and to other people, what they fought for and the price that they paid so that you and I can freely walk into a meeting like this and give a prophetic word to somebody? Do you know the origins of your ministry? Do you know the origins of your worship ministry? Of how we've gone from Luther 500 plus years ago, where the choir and the priest sung in a different language to the congregation, that we get the breakthrough with Luther and the priesthood of all believers, and then through from there to the present day and the kind of worship that we have right here. Do you know the price that people paid to steward inner healing and to learn about inner healing? And the people like Derek Prince and Blessings and Curses and Floyd McClung and the Father Heart of God and the Sanfords and what they invested with and Elijah House and Freedom in Christ with Anderson. Do you know the price that was paid that you walk in today? Because there are keys, if we understand the history, the revival in our lifetime, that will release a fresh authority in us, that we will move in the authority of the gift and the ministries that God has given to us. What will we do with it? This revival in our lifetime. I wrote down, I think, 6 things. We need to learn how we got to where we are. I want to encourage you leaders, learn how we got to where we are. Spend some time on this. And don't, like me, allow an offense to happen that keeps me from reading a book. The book I'll share about tomorrow actually has a similar funny story attached, but I won't tell you that for now. But I challenge you to learn in your ministry, in your gift, how we got to where we are. Church growth, you shouldn't even be thinking about church growth without having a look at John Wimber's church growth teaching. He's an authority on it. And you can look and say, well, maybe the vineyard's not where it should be today. Maybe it's not. But it doesn't mean we shouldn't study it. Learn how we got to where we are is one reason for understanding history. And secondly, to avoid repeating mistakes. We need to make sure that we avoid repeating mistakes. And every generation makes them. But we need to learn this. And that's why I love that scene so much. I mean, some of those elders out of that Calvary Chapel left, but that one man who walked across the aisle and sat and put his arms round, as it were, the next generation. He got it. But you can see through history that, different mistakes, and I'm not highlighting any of them. But you read those books and you'll read of the mistakes. There were mistakes in the way that people handled and treated Lonnie Frisbee, his extraordinary anointing. He didn't really know what to do with it, and people didn't know what to do with him. But he was anointed and people got healed because of his ministry. We need to learn from our mistakes in history. And we need to align ourselves with what God has done and is doing. That verse early on in Habakkuk, I'm going to do things that will utterly amaze you. We need to align ourselves with that. Are you aligning yourself with things that will utterly amaze you? Are you believing for those things? I think it's easy for us to have our heads down and go, look at the chaos, look at the change. What are we going to do with AI? How are we going to work with that in this world of change that feels out of control? Are you aligning yourself with the fear of things going wrong on earth, or are you aligning yourself with the things that God has said he will do? Look amongst the nations and see what great things he is doing across our world. And in our lifetime, these things have dramatically changed. Fourth, to create thankfulness. In other words, study history to learn how we got here, to avoid repeating mistakes, to align ourselves with what God has done and is doing, and to be thankful. Sue and I were very privileged. I know some of you would have known Gerald Coates much more than us, but towards the end of his life, we developed just a very small friendship with him. And one of the main reasons that we had one meal with him, we just wanted to say thank you. I just wanted to say thank you to this man. And we were able to joke and say, yeah, we remember when we were at the Albert Hall in the 70s and we were just teenagers, and there you were, Gerald, with your white suit on. Why did you do that, kind of is what we really wanted to say, you know. But he was a pioneer. He was an utter pioneer. If you want to know more, there's a book you've written about Gerald Coates called Pioneer, in actual fact, I believe. Is it just called Pioneer? This man was a pioneer. We got to say thank you. Thank you. I've sat with RT and said, thank you, RT. Thank you that, and I haven't listed these things, but you put in there things like spring harvest in our land. Do you know the Americans don't have a clue about our camps and festivals? We can look at America and think, what an amazing country. They don't have a clue how to do spring harvest and new wines and David's tent and big church festivals. They happen in our land. And I got to say to RT, thank you for that week in 1987 where you had not long taken over Westminster Chapel from the great Dr. Martin Lloyd-Jones, whose complete set of books on Romans I have. And what did you do? You stood up and preached on Romans. Thank you, RT. We need to be thankful. And we need to be hungry. To get hungry. To hungry to believe that God can and will do it again. Do it again in our lifetime. I sat watching, I think I've watched it 4 times. It might even be 5. But I watched that Jesus Revolution. I think, God, we do it again, God. Do it again. Do you know, when they were baptizing people in the Jesus Revolution, they didn't get them saved before they got in the water. And we'll probably watch that and go, oh dear, I'm not sure about that. We should have a baptism class. There should be a 12-week baptism class. We need to make sure that these people are completely sorted out. And there they are. They're walking out into the ocean of Pirates Cove, and they're being led to Jesus as they get baptized and they come up completely changed and transformed. Do it again. Enlarge our vision. Do it again, that we would get hungry. Where's the next John Wimber? Where's the next Lonnie Frisbee? Where's the next gathering of prophets that Mike Bickle gathered? Where's the next Paul Cain? Where are people who are going to turn up at meetings and say, at 3:38, you'll know that that God has sent me to be with you, because at 3:38 there will be an earthquake. And even the size of that earthquake, those kind of prophetic words, they're in our lifetime. They've happened. They're part of our history and part of our story. And I believe the last one is that we would dare to plot our future path. And by that I mean that we would dare to believe that God would do it again, and we would dare to be people who do put up tents in car parks and in fields and believe that God will show up. I love that here they get 20 new believers packs ready on a Sunday, believing that there'll be new believers every Sunday. Those are simple things, but they are plotting our path. They're structuring expectations. It's in our lifetime. New Wine, Pioneer, New Frontiers, Hillsong, Vineyard, the HTB church plants in our lifetime. Do it again, God. Do it again. Sue and I, we didn't plan Bethel. God did. It wasn't because we were clever. God set it up. And I was reading the Lonnie Frisbee book, and there was just a moment one morning I was reading, and I said this to God. I said, God, I would love to have been a part of something like this. And he said, you are. And I flashed back to sitting in the room in the very early days of Bethel, when a couple of hundred people came on a Sunday night, when the room wasn't full for a conference, when nobody knew Bethel music. And I remember sitting in that room and thinking, God, I'm in the room of something, maybe it's a little bit like what John Wimber and his team experienced. But what it put inside of me was I wasn't satisfied with it. It's like, God, that was an amazing. But I don't think you gave me that experience for America. I think you gave me that experience for here. And I don't know why God would have done what he did with us. I don't. But I just don't want to waste it. I don't want to waste that he would take a prison governor and a wife who needed some help. Not because she was married to a prison governor, although that was part of it, but it wasn't that really. He would take us and send us on a journey. And God said to me, you are a part of something. You're a part of something. And I just want to encourage every one of you, to start to think about what God could do through you, through your ministry, through your church. What could God do? In the midst of the years, revive us again. I have sketched a very, very sketchy timeline from 1966. Some of you who know more history than me would fill dozens and dozens of pages. I'm just trying to whet your appetite. You see, when I get into a meeting and people start praying, we need another Jesus revolution, my head says, what does that mean? Well, I'm beginning to learn what that means. I'm beginning to believe and get a vision for that and see that. And so I just want to encourage you to get hungry. And I think one of the keys is that we also pay attention to what sometimes ends moves of God or ends revivals. And one of the most obvious that I am aware of is this, that we forget what birthed us. We just forget what birthed us. And we get caught up in religion and details and rules, and we forget what birthed us in some respects. And I don't want to be critical, but I'm just reading the bit of history. Vineyard was birthed on Mother's Day with Lonnie Frisbee, but he wasn't too happy about Toronto. My point is that sometimes we have to be aware and pay attention that we might be judging or criticizing something that's happening today and miss the fact that it is what actually birthed us. And we need to make sure that we check our foundations regularly. We check what started what God is doing in my life, in my church, in my ministry, and that we make sure that we go back there. A failure to success plan in the midst of revival, I believe, is also a reason why things end. In other words, in the midst of revival, we kind of take it for granted. We become complacent instead of thinking, how do we maintain what God is doing? Planning for the future. Not administering the life out, but actually making sure that in the midst of what God is doing, We keep thinking forward. We keep dreaming bigger. We keep planning. And incidentally, I discovered this week, which I should have discovered a long time ago, as one of my favorite words is strategy. But the word fight, when Paul says to Timothy, take the prophetic word and with it fight, the word for fight in Timothy is actually related to strategy. It's not about knives and guns and fisticuffs. It's actually about strategy. It's a related word. Number 3, endings happen because we forgot what other people paid a price for. We just forget the price that was paid. And finally, we write out of history those who fell but contributed so much. And the truth is that we wouldn't have too good a Bible if we'd done that. I want to invite you to stand. I just want you just to begin. Begin to say, do it again. Position yourself in the timeline. Some of you are younger, some of you are older, but this is our history. Now, somebody will probably go away and write a brilliant timeline, and I will say, brilliant, thank you very much. This is just my messed up look at 66 to today, in my lifetime, in my land, in the people that I know and love. God has done so much. And we can look around and go, it's chaotic. We're not sure about politics. We lost our beloved Queen last year. We got, economic problems and all sorts of things. Well, I want to tell you this. God is most creative in chaos. And if we're afraid of the pace of change, I have good news for you. Because if the world has a pace of change, then heaven has a faster one. Because if AI, electric cars can happen in a blink of an eye, so can hundreds of thousands of people turning to Jesus in the blink of an eye. So just begin to cry out. Cry out. In our lifetime, do it again. Raise up another Wimber, another Frisbee, another Mike Bickle, another Paul Kane, another Terry Virgo, another Gerald Coates, another David Watson. Stir up the moves of God. Let us not lose in our lifetime what men and women fought for. We're thankful for what birthed us. We're thankful for how we got here. But we don't want to stop here. Would you do it again? Would you do it again in our lifetime? Revive us again in the midst of the years. In the midst of the years, revive us again. Just begin to cry out. Just begin to cry out.